Well, welcome to the first 3D Printing World Expo here in Burbank. My name is Derek, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to show basic ways you can take an existing animation asset and adapt it for 3D printing, because hopefully some of you that are familiar with animation assets, they're not always complete. They tend to leave off parts of the model that would be hidden, the interior of a costume, for instance. So fortunately, in this case, there is already an interior structure, but even though it's existing, it's not set up for printing yet, because it's really important that all parts of the mesh be interpenetrating. So hold on just one second. All right. Nice thing about using ZBrush is it gives you a very quick way to split these assets up, isolating different parts of the mesh. Turn on double so we can see the back sides of that mesh. So in this case, not exactly the selection that I wanted. So I'm going to come in here and click there. That's going to take out that separation from the inside and the outside of the model. And if I continue chasing this around, do the same thing there. And then again on this side, Badoom. And now I can give the interior and the exterior of the model separate polygroups. Polygroup is just a very quick way of assigning different parts of a model, different attributes, preserving them. So once that's done, and then, by the way, this model, this earthquake figure, ships with ZBrush. It's part of one of the many free assets that they include anytime you purchase a copy of ZBrush. And in this case, you can see how the interior of this surface is burning through the exterior, and we really don't want that to happen. So I'm going to grab the Move brush real quick here. And now that I've assigned polygroups, I can very quickly, first of all, isolate that. And I can create masking that will allow me to now just manipulate that inside surface. And I just want to push it in. Push it in and look around for any other areas that might be a little bit thin. And then once again, adding the figure back into it. And turn that dynamic off here. And putting it in transparent mode and even ghost mode, you can kind of sort of see that this inner surface is not biting through enough the torso of the figure here. The objective is to just boolean everything together into one object. Some printers recognize multiple meshes as one object. Some of them don't. I like to err on the side of caution, and I want to create a model that has the fewest parts possible that makes for more accurate printing with fewer mishaps and misprints and things of that nature. So now that I've isolated this interior surface, I want to be able to kind of just scale the whole thing in. And going to one of the oldest parts of the ZBrush tool group here in this deformation palette, I can just inflate this mesh now, and I can watch, turn this transparency off, see how now it's biting into the model. If I select the model here, and I hide part of it. And now let me switch back to you can see now that the interior of that vest is well inside the rest of the model. Now, obviously, oh, well, Derek, my gosh, that is so thick, it doesn't look right. Well, I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to go to the highest subdivision level here. And I'm going to store what's called a morph target. This kind of like freezes the attributes of your model at the highest level. And now I can do that same trick. I can inflate the interior of this vest in as much as I need to. And I mean, it can be really that pillowy and ugly. Oh my God, that looks horrible. But if I switch to a morph brush, that will quickly restore the parts of the model that I need restored to where they were before I started manipulating it. So I can get the aesthetic back in the parts of the model that need them very quickly. I can just push this back until I get, and now on some of these areas, it might require a little bit more finesse. I can just drag this along here and get that reveal back that I want and still maintaining the tightness and the penetration of this mesh into the original model. It only takes a few minutes. And in the interest of saving time, I can switch to a different version of the model here real quick. Turn that off. And now you can see how still got that penetration into the initial, the main figure, and still maintain the aesthetic that the original model had. Now, a lot of times, I know I've done it, it's happened to me, you'll send your model off to a service bureau, and they may be super busy, or they may not care, or they may not know what they're doing, and they correct a few flaws for you, and oh my God, it's ruined. You get back this part and you're like, this is not what I sent you guys. And they're like, well, you know, you didn't set it up properly. And that's when I started realizing, if I want to have good results, it's best that I act as my own service bureau. And that way, I can't fault anyone. So that's what drove me to really start relying on myself to get these things set up the way I want. Because otherwise, I can always blame the other company, but they don't care. They've already got my money. So, get back here to start here. Now, the figure itself, this is a really important thing to talk about because, get him restored here. It's a nice model. It's interesting. It's energetic. But there are a few things that you might want to take into consideration before you decide, I'm just going to go get this printed. How big is it going to be printed? Scale is a huge issue. You need to be able to scale detail to meet the scale of the output. So if you've got a 3-inch figure, it's going to look really different than if you printed it at 12 inches. So those are important principles to keep in mind. That in the build envelope, will this figure fit inside of a bounding box that equals the printer if I want to print it in one part? For most figurine work like this, things you've seen from Sideshow Collectibles or DC or Marvel or whatever, the answer to that is no. They print in multiple parts. So again, the way you set the model up here with polygroups, if I go down to subdivision levels, you can see that this model has, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 polygroups here. And I know for a fact, just for this demo, I definitely want to go through the process of what it takes to break this up. And it's very, very simple. The rest of this figure here, I'll leave intact, and I just want to deal with this arm right here. Well, I can very easily split this off on its own, but there's going to be issues. I come back here, where this arm is intersecting the model. You can see that, oh, there's some very strange, weird, interpenetrating parts here that you really need to clean up if you're going to have a joint there. So nice thing about doing this in ZBrush is you have the freedom of going up and down in subdivision history to very easily make adjustments at a lower level. And get back to my move brush here. Ba, 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 move. And you just can grab on to this opening and start moving things out so that they're more planar. And I could step up subdivision level. And you're going to keep doing this and refining this opening. Now, did this at home last night. And this process took about, a half an hour. And I don't want to bore you with a half hour's work. But I can show you what that will look like here. All right. So I remove that part and that part. That's pretty much what you end up with. And take the solo off. And what we need to do now is create a way to actually socket those two parts together, doing Boolean operations. And I don't know how many of you use CAD software, NURBS modelers like Rhino or SolidWorks. I have yet to find a more efficient Boolean engine than ZBrush. Its power is truly astounding because you're dealing with millions and millions of polygons, whereas most packages aren't going to give you that freedom. You know, you're going to be very limited. I know Rhino starts choking about 150 to 300,000 polygons, depending on the system that you're using. So I'm not dinging Rhino. I use it all the time. It's great, but it doesn't do everything. ZBrush really does take care of a lot of the issues that really can be very perplexing. So let's see here. Get rid of some of this. All right. So the first thing we want to do is close the holes here. And some other software packages, that becomes a big deal. In ZBrush, all I have to do is hit a button. So I just go, close holes. Actually, let me delete what's hidden there and do this over. So close the holes. There we go, right? So if I turn my frames back on, even though this looks like it's the same poly group, actually not. And if I pull up my transpose line here and hold down Control, and I can click on there, and it's going to mask off the rest of the model except for the new patch that was created. And now I can grab this patch and I can pull this thing out. See, what I'm doing is I'm going to create a positive that when I do a Boolean subtraction from the main model, it's going to create a socket that's going to fit this arm perfectly. Once I've got this pulled out a little bit, I can go a little bit more extreme here, something like that. I can switch over and grab another one of the many useful brushes inside of ZBrush. I'm going to grab this clip curve brush. This is a great tool. I use it all the time. And see how I pull out this spline and there's a gradient on one side of it? That's telling me that anything on the gradient side of this spline is going to get crushed back to the white line. So it's not actually cutting any geometry. Hold a second there. It's just crushing it. So if I give myself a wide enough shot there, now I can just come down here and I can just snap a line, move it a little closer, and bang. Look at that, perfectly flat. And if I turn the frames button back on, I haven't altered the poly count in any way, the point count, none of that's been changed. It's just physically mashed it back, just like you were mashing aluminum foil or something. So now I can switch back to scale, and I can kind of scale this back in a little bit. And now I'm set up pretty much to create a nice socket, in the figure. All right, so if I look at my original model here, and I turn on the frames, all I did was delete the lower subdivision levels. And if I want to, I can just group this all together as one piece. What I want to do is I want to call up the very powerful Dynamesh engine that's inside ZBrush. This is a dynamic remeshing system that Each time you activate Dynamesh, it creates a new mesh and gets rid of stretched polygons and allows you to combine separate parts into one part. Very, very powerful. I'm just going to set this up. I'm not going to have any blur on. By default, project and blur are on when you open the Dynamesh menu here. But I generally turn those off, especially when I'm setting things up for printing, because I don't want to have any distortion. And sometimes when you turn on this project button, it's like vacuum forming the model back onto itself. And sometimes it can create some artifacts. It's auto-saving right now. Another new feature which is very, very helpful. So I'm going to crank the resolution up really high. Ooh. And all I have to do is click this button, and it's going to go through and it's going to calculate, and it's going to dynamically remesh this thing. So if there's any stretched polygons anywhere, it's going to get rid of them. Surface distortions that could be where meshes are interpenetrating each other, they're intersecting each other, it's going to get rid of that interior mesh that's not being seen. Now my point count is over 3 million, and if I turn this back on, you can see how insanely dense this mesh is. Now, for animation, obviously that's not good. You're not ever going to create anything that dense in something like AutoCAD or Rhino. But this is the beauty of ZBrush again here, is poly count doesn't matter. Because when you get to a certain point, right before you're ready to send this off to the printer, they have a really nice decimation plugin. Again, the most powerful I've ever used. You can crunch this 3 million, this eventually is going to end up being 7 million, down to about 400,000 points. So with absolutely no loss of detail. So the workflow in ZBrush for me is poly count, I don't care. If each one of my parts is over 10 million polygons, I don't care. I'm going to do what I need to do the editing I need to do, and then at the end I'm going to decimate everything back down, and we're going to be good to go. All right. So if I turn my arm back on here, in fact I'm going to switch over to my arm, turn my guy back on here, and I turn on transparency, you can see how that socketed area that I created is nesting inside the model. And that's really, really important. But I'm going to go one step further. I don't just want that socket to be there. I also want to have some type of pin, or in the model making they call it a key. It's going to key those two parts together without a shadow of a doubt. And I happen to have an object right here that's just a cube. That's all it is, 6 faces. And I can create a brush that can insert this right on the model. Now, if I was doing this in Rhino, hold on a second, create the part, and I have to move the part and scale the part and blah, 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 blah. But by creating an insert mesh brush out of really any kind of geometry, this is very simple. Just open the brush menu here, and I have a button that says, hey, create insert mesh. Great. What happens? Well, it asks, hey, you want to make a new one, or do you want to pin it onto an existing? Just make a new one here. All right. You can see that the brush icon now has changed to this shape. So when I get back to my dude here, turn the solo on, come around here, and I can line this up, and I just draw, and I'm going to get that key exactly where I want it. Now I'll do that again, because as you're drawing, you're actually scaling it. How big do you want it? Oh, I want it that big. Great. So occasionally, you know, the way this works is it's locking onto a surface normal. So if I was putting it on an uneven surface like this, it might not be so straight, right? So fortunately, all you have to do is, again, call up the action line here, and I can move that part in, or I can rotate it in any direction that's going to suit my needs. Don't need that there. And actually, this is seated really well, and I'm good to go. I only want to do one more thing before I create this Boolean join here. I want to duplicate this key exactly in the same location, and I also want to scale it up just a little bit so that the socket that it's creating in this part of the model is going to be just a hair bigger. Because the problem is with keys is if they're made perfectly to join each other, there's no room for glue. And it's really hard to get the parts together, and you're frustrated. So if you make a duplicate of the key that's going to be like a Boolean subtraction there, just a little bit bigger, it creates a socket exactly the right shape, but just with a little bit of gap in there to put some glue in. Simply, it's real easy. And then the primary socket that I created is actually going to seat the part where it needs to go, and this is great for super tight gluing. So I'm going to look at this and I can go, okay, well, I'm going to select that and hide it. Once it's hidden, I can split what's hidden. So now I end up with a new part that looks like this. Turn that off. It's exactly where it was. Now I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to take my duplicate and I'm going to find a spot in here. I'm just going to click. My action line is right where I want it to be. Orient my part a little bit. And actually I'm going to move this back kind of in the center. And now all I have to do is scale this up. So as I'm scaling it up, you can see with the transparency how much bigger that socket is, actually. That's a bit much. So I'm just going to go just a touch. That should be enough, right? All right, I'm going to save this for later. So now I need to get my arm back with my original key. So all I have to do now is merge these files down to each other. So I can merge it down. It gives me a warning. This is undoable. It's not true. Nothing's undoable. Okay, lying. All right, so now that I have them back into the same file, I need to combine them into one object. Well, I'm going to go back to my Dynamesh here and make sure my project and blur are not very good there. I'm going to crank this all the way up. And now all I need to do is hit the button. Boom, done. It's merged it all together. Looks great. So now I want to do the same thing with the body and the arm, only I want to create an object that's going to subtract this surface from my body. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate this arm. So I have my original, and I'm not going to hurt it at all. And I'm going to change this little widget right there. It looks like Pac-Man, something biting, a wolf biting the moon, whatever your mythology is. That means that now this is set up to do a Boolean subtraction. So you've seen, I've been doing a lot with changing the colors of these objects, right? Well, in this case, the way you tell the Dynamesh engine, hey, I want to remove this from the other thing, is you have to give it a special color. And this is the only time you'll see a white color being put on an object here. It's a group is a Dynamesh sub, all right? So that's telling the Dynamesh engine that we're going to take this part away from the part that I'm going to merge down to it. So I've got my main body here. Turn the colors off. Right? And I'm going to merge down. Say OK. Okay, now all I have to do now is control and swipe